find audiences where they want to reach on whatever content that they're consuming, TV content that they're consuming, and then measuring all the business outcomes that matter to them to drive their business. So without further ado, Travis, we're here to hear from you. You've been doing some really cool things at Uber. I've been really excited to see a lot of the marketing efforts during this time. And I know you just started at Uber in January, and kind of a crazy time to start a new role. You want to talk a little bit about how it's been just coming into the role? I feel like you're already making such a big impact, so would love to hear how it's going.
Yeah, no, and hi, Davina. Good to see you. Last time I saw you, I feel like it was much darker because it was so early for you on the West Coast. So
I'm much like
I know,
yeah.
shading the color blue on your walls. It's popping. It's nice. Yeah, so I started, like you said, in January, and I probably had about a two solid weeks in the office before everything kind of started to go downhill, and my life shifted to 100% Zoom, and I left New York, and I'm down here in South Carolina where I grew up. Living in my childhood bedroom, so like living the dream. And
it could be good or bad. I don't know.
it's good, like when I want to eat like really good food, but like when I want like to actually be an adult, like I have been for most of my life, then it gets a little awkward. But and then also Uber announced, I think last week, that our offices are closed until July 2021. So now I'm like, okay, this is another year. But yeah, I mean, so it's been interesting because there's only one person on my entire team who I've ever met in person. Every single person on my team around the globe, I've only ever had Zooms with. I play this game in my head of, like how tall is everyone? Because it's just something you never think about. But now I'm like, are they 4'8"? Are they 7'2"? I have no idea. Like, I can't wait to like see people in person to like actually know how tall they are. But yeah, no, it's been interesting. It's been challenging, but I think it's also been a really good opportunity too, because there's good and bad about working from home all the time. And I find that I've never worked harder in my life than I am right now, which is a whole other issue that I have to start to get a better balance. But it has allowed for me to really focus, and especially as my team is new, as our organization structure is new, as our global framework is new, it has really given me the opportunity to just kind of like focus and really set some operational changes across the team and across the org before we really do start to run. So it's been a challenge. I've enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next 12 months. I feel like if I reinforce the positivity, it will come to fruition, right? And it actually will be good not to be in the office for a year.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously with the times in the Zoom, I'm usually on a plane half the time, and I've had so much time just actually getting to know people, ironically, because I'm on video with them versus in an airport on my cell phone talking to people. So it's been great. Look, Uber, as we know, has gone through a lot of change over the last few years, and so you come in addition to everything going on with current events, into the organization at a unique time, and the impact that you're already making in such a short time, I feel like is in a positive way. It's been great. Can you talk a little bit about, you have a big agency background, right? And there's a lot. Everyone on the agency side wants to be on the client side, right? And so you made it. You're on the client side. Can you talk a little bit about how your agency background has contributed to your role, and then is it all cracked up to what everyone expects being the client on the client side? So a little bit about that would be great.
Yeah. So I think the good thing about being and growing up basically on the agency side is you just learn how to be super nimble and super reactive, right? Like there's that fine balance of, I grew up mostly on CPG. So, I was planning, 2 years out, like kind of like getting my tactical plans done. But then there were always changes that were going to happen, right? So it's just like, you would get to launching in a couple months, you'd always have to redo full plans, partial plans, whatever. So there was always that good balance that you learned around like structure and long-term planning, but also making sure that you're able to be nimble and reactive and not afraid to change, and not, kind of like backing down on that. So I think that has helped me just, and I'm looking at this like more one-to-one versus my experience, is Uber, and I love Uber. Uber is not, the CPGs of the world that are doing 12-month, 24-month planning. I think that we were kidding around before when we were talking is like, I still don't have my full H2 budgets, which is like, we're like into H2 now. So this is like completely opposite from what I used to. So I think it has given me the ability to be able to take some of the structure and kind of align with as much structure as we can while still being flexible and still being nimble. We're doing plans, like 2 months out now, which again is just like, it's not the best, but it's also, I think it's worked well in this time too, because every single month is changing. And what we're doing in the US right now is completely different than what's going on in, North Asia, where it's getting back to be a bit of new normal. Versus what's going on in Brazil, which is very similar to us, which is where Europe, which is kind of in between. So I think as much as I would love for more long-term kind of focus and structure and operational rigor, I think it's actually behooved us not to have that here. And
Yeah.
then on your other question about like, is it all, what it's cracked up to be? And I always apologize to my friends who have grown up on the brand side. But in my head, I always kind of picture as like, that's where you go to coast. That's where, it's easier there. You have partners who are kind of helping you do all of your stuff. It's not that at all. Like I said, I've been working more now than I've ever worked in the past. I don't think I really understood like all the internal relationships that are needed on the brand side, especially in a centralized role like media, where you're partnering with the marketing team, you're partnering with the brand team, you're partnering with the analytics and the insights team. You're partnering with all of your agency partners. Like you just have so many more partners that you're responsible for, that you're almost the Sherpa of. And it's not political by any means, but the soft skills, I think, become much more prevalent in the brand side than the agency side. So I don't think one is better than the other. Actually, I think they both have their pros and cons, and I've enjoyed both sides so far.
I think it's a great round out for your experience and career path. So it's great. I would, I think too, I find it really interesting because just Uber being a tech company and being more of a reactive state and not like, your established, CPG brands or whatever that are more planning future out, that's almost been like perfect storm for you coming into this environment, right? Because I've talked to other advertisers that are having to make that shift from being in that structure and having to take the organization and turn creative around in 8 weeks or whatever it is. So, you guys Uber's never really even participated in that front. So can you talk a little bit about, flexibility and the nimble, like what like kind of things have been working for you? You've got a lot of new creative out there. What's been working and how have you embraced that kind of quick turn on things? And how are you, any thoughts on the upfront and the changes going on there? I know it's kind of coming to a close, but I think it's a very different upfront than it has been. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one constant for us has always been, demand, which is both on, the earner side as well as, either the eater or the writer side. And the good thing about that for us is like that takes care of itself from an always on, performance media side of things. So, it's funny, I would say like maybe 3 years ago, we were predominantly a performance media brand, and that's where most of our dollars were going. Now we've actually made a big pivot where our brand dollars are actually, overcoming actually our performance dollars now. So that's also been kind of a big pivot here. So I think the ability for us to always be able to drive demand across everything that we're doing from like that performance side of things, that still kind of stays true. I think what is nuanced for us that becomes like completely different is what is the upper funnel storytelling that we're actually trying to do. So, last year it was really about being, transparent, whenever we came out with our safety report and trying to make sure that people knew what was going on, pushing us into favorability. And then now it's really about safety. So I think that's been the good thing about us not participating in the upfronts, because we don't necessarily know what our brand story or our brand narrative needs to be, because we are such a volatile company. but then the performances is what kind of capture everything always on. So yeah, so I think that's, and it allows for us to like, also as a infant company, right, in the grand scheme of things, our consumer is completely changing. Like every single day, we have a really different understanding of who our consumer is and who we actually should be going after. So whenever we get into this moment of, again, me coming from like, mostly food and bev on the CPG side, I always knew it was moms, 25 to 54, and where I was going to find them really wasn't going to change. So participating in an upfront made total sense. We've actually changed our demo and our target probably 4 times on the Uber Eats side of things since I've got here because of the trajectory of the business. So it also just allows for us flexibility because we're very much so an audience first approach to how we're doing everything, and as much segmentation and as much kind of honing in as we can.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys are have some of the richest first-party data in the world, and valuable first-party data, and sounds like you've got a group internally, Bullseye, that helps with the audience strategy and everything. How do you, because you've got, Uber used to be really heavy rides focused, and now you guys have really been also Uber Eats, especially during this time that business has done really well. So you're having to find a lot of different audiences. Can you talk about the different audiences and the approach you take with supporting both businesses?
Yeah, and you're right. Like it's funny because, the tech companies I've worked with in the past have been very precious with their data, right? And they've kind of really internalized it. While we protect our data at all costs, everything is always PII compliant, but there's only so much that only we can do with our data versus ensuring that we're working with our partners as well to look at our data. How does their third party enrich our 1P? How does our 1P enrich their 3P? Group M, who's our North America, agency, how does our data actually import into their planning tools so they're actually planning against real human beings instead of survey-based, kind of stuff that they've been doing in the past. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like, what from a TV standpoint and from a ride standpoint, our targeting is actually quite broad right now, because really the narrative right now is all about safety. And it's about, like when you're ready to move again, we're here and we're ready for you. But that is very, very macro, right? And it's not really specifically tied back to a need state of very specific individual human beings. Versus on the eat side of things, like we have so much data about them. We know what type of food they like. We know where they live. We know like what, average wait times are, for certain restaurants in their area. So what we're able to do is we're really able to slice all of those different people apart from each other, really understand all of their different need states, making sure that we have creative that's actually going to speak to them based upon what they need as a human being, that they look at that, they feel it's relevant, they feel it represents them, and we know that they're going to convert a lot more easily. And also just ensuring that the data is not only living in a performance world, but ensuring that we're partnering people, like with y'all or like, with people in digital out of home, where we're able to look via, like a live ramp and looking at how we're ingesting our 1P out, like from that out of home digital ad exposure, right? We're able to track that all the way down to conversion. So how do we actually just get smarter with our data as well, ensuring that not only we're more effective through the targeting and the content that we're serving them, but we're also more efficient, right? Because we're able to actually track everything from at the very, very top of the funnel all the way down to the bottom.
Well, I know, that's the cool thing, right? It used to, and I guess being a tech company, that's kind of what's probably had them so lower funnel focus, is because data only existed for the last click, and that's changed now. But I loved what when you and I talked, I loved what you talked about, like the old media is the cool media now, right? You want to talk a little bit about the old media? I mean, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but it's old media is now measurable, right? I mean, that's
measurable and like at times more effective, and which I'm sure half of all my bosses, hear that and they're like, "What are you talking?" Like, because I grew up born and bred digital, right? Like, even when I started this role, and I had my first meeting with MediaCom here in the US, I was like, y'all are going to have to tell me how to buy out of home. Like I've never bought a billboard in my life, because
Mhm.
that just wasn't my background. It was entirely digital. So I was definitely very skeptical of offline or kind of traditional because I was like, to your point, I was just like, well, you can't measure it, right? Well, the MMMs are just going to always say that they're working because the MMMs were built, in order to favor anything that's kind of mass like that. So I came in with a very kind of preconceived notion about what offline was able to do versus what online was able to do. We've very quickly seen through a lot of our survey data, brand lift data, kind of cross-channel brand lift studies that we've been doing, that especially for us right now, through the lens that we need to tell a story, the best place to do that are in places like TV, out of home, and radio.
Yeah.
There's so much clutter in digital, right? And I think that digital has its place for so many things. But whenever you're really trying to tell a longer story that isn't just like trying to get people to convert in that very particular moment, hard to break through on mobile and social. So I think that's why it's so cool for us, and the fact that we can actually, like we were talking about before, you can measure all the way through the funnel from digital out of home. We're looking at like really cool, kind of like causal or incrementality from TV, through like, brands like iSpot, to look at things like holistically like that. We didn't have that, a couple of years ago. So now I think we're able to measure offline the same way that we have been able to measure online in the past. And we're actually, while it is sometimes more expensive, we're actually getting a higher ROI because the effectiveness and the storytelling is much more powerful there than maybe some of the online platforms.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you guys, you are like, your DNA is in the is grounded in audience space, whereas a lot of other marketers that's a new thing for them, the shift from Nielsen to audiences. And then being able, at Ampersand, we're trying to, we call it moving TV forward, which is kind of right in that, which is finding allowing advertisers to find audiences no matter where they're viewing TV content, and then being able to measure all that. But let's talk a little bit about something that I know near and dear to your heart, and I think definitely contributing to the success that Uber's having in terms of your brand metrics, which is around brand purpose. Do you want to talk a little bit about brand purpose and your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this in the sense that, like, I think this year, as insane and as crazy as it's been, I think if anything, it's just shown that brands have the authority to take a stance, and brands have the authority to take a position, and consumers are actually looking for that. They're looking for brands to take a position. They're looking for brands to educate them. They're looking for brands to support what they deem to be right and correct. So Uber operates very well in crisis, is what I found, and that's when we can actually mobilize really, really quickly. And I think in the past we've tried to move towards this notion of like, what does a master brand stand for? But we just haven't been able to, because we haven't been pushed in that direction, because Eats was over here, Rides was over here. They were operating in their own silos. We didn't really understand the audience overlay, because we were just operating them differently. But what we've done now, especially in a moment when our rides business is obviously down, we've taken this moment to take a stance. And back in April, we were one of the first brands. We came out with a pretty heavy weight in TV of a spot that said, "Thank you for not riding." So like, we are the mobility company that moves people, and we are telling you, don't move. Like, let the frontline workers, let the people who actually need to move, and don't allow for the spread of this to happen. Whenever the whole mask debate started, we were the first came out, but even before the retailers is saying like, no mask, no ride. Like, we are in a position to protect you as a rider, and more importantly, like, or just as importantly, like our earners, right? Who actually are having to get out there every single day and still, work. Like, how do we ensure that everyone is protected, and we're ensuring that all of that is happening? So it's been really refreshing that we've been able to take this, and we've actually seen, by taking stances like that, a lot of our scores, especially on a brand lift side of things, and favorability is usually what we measure as like our major KPI, especially on the ride side. Eats is a little bit different. It's usually more about consideration. But it's gone through the roof, right? So it's increased higher than it has, in the past couple of years. at a lot of the qualitative stuff that we're seeing is like people are just kind of thankful for us, you know, not politicizing things, just saying what we think and doing what's right. You know, like we had an internal meeting and one of the execs, you know, was looking at, you know, this chart of just like, you know, like the rides revenue obviously was down and it was kind of like coming down at an incremental rate. But then like there was this comment that everyone just embraced of just like, this sucks for us, like, but how amazing is this for humanity? You know, like how good is it that people are actually staying home and they're actually doing what's right and not spreading this? So, you know, you have those moments, and I think that that's what's really important for me. I'm pushing our organization, and I think all organizations, you know, it's we have a really you know, I think we're privileged in the sense to work in the industry that we do, to have the voice that we do and the platform that we do. And if you're not standing for something, and if you're not making purpose out of your brand, then, you know, it's hard for me to understand, like, what are you really doing, you know, as a brand, especially as younger consumers and Gen Z and the TikTok generation demand it more than anyone else has ever. And they are soon to become, you know, a hugely spending generation that we need to ensure that we're making sure that we're not only speaking to our older customers, but also our younger ones too.
Well, and you had to have buy-in from your management, right? Because that approach, that brand purpose approach, is very much like you're in it for the long haul, right? That is not a performance driving strategy, right? I'm sure you have other performance driving strategies, but you know, you're looking 2 years out at how you change the brand and the perception of the brand. How have you gotten that buy-in from, you know, especially during this time when people are looking at the bottom line and you're in meetings like that about revenue and all that?
Yeah, I mean, it starts at the top, right? And I think that, you know, my boss, Thomas Renice, who had come over, for, you know, I came in January, he came over in September. You know, he was the CMO at Google Hardware for, I think, like 10 years. The first campaign that he went to Dara, our CEO, with was this thank you riders, right? For thank you for not riding. You know, he's just like, so I was a little freaked out about going to the CEO, you know, and being like, so got a great idea. I think we should put out a spot and tell people don't use our product, right? And I'm just like, oh my God. But then like you realize like Dara is just like, yeah, like that's the right thing to do. And I think that's what's been really refreshing for me coming into Uber, because I didn't have that same perception of Uber before I came in. You know, like I don't know if I had the most positive kind of correlation with the Uber brand based upon what I as a consumer had seen before I started. Once I got here, that's when I just realized that, you know, we just kind of get in our own way and we're not always really telling these like really cool and impactful things that we're doing around the world. You know, like we have agendas and like partnerships to like stop human trafficking, you know, to like, you know, feed, you know, like all the frontline workers, to give them free rides, like to empower, you know, our earners for, you know, for insurance and education. Like it's just like there's so much good work that's being done that they're actually not doing it. I think this was just again one of those moments that we're like, you know what, F it. Like, you know, crisis brings out the best in us. Let's use this momentum. And it was positioned through that lens too. And it's a good point that it's like, you're not going to see the near term impact of this. Like, this is not going to drive the business in H1. This is not going to drive the business in H2. This is looking at 2022 out, but this is going to be what allows for the brand to survive, because it's not that bottom funnel just transacting on there at the bottom all day.
Yeah, definitely. So we got a lot of questions coming in for you. So I thought I would, but one I think which ties to this, right? Which is you've got this brand purpose, mission, right? Storytelling, but you got to be nimble. How are you handling content, you know, cranking out different content and that sort of thing? And maybe tie in, we didn't talk about your agency partners, but you've been doing a lot of work there, and I know they're really important to you. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, even when I came, so when I first came in, you know, we work with a lot of agencies. And I think that that was kind of a point of the past, because, you know, when Uber started, it was hyper local. So it's not like we didn't even have just country general managers. We have city general managers who controlled their budget, controlled their agencies. They did whatever they wanted to do. And I think that's a big reason why we were so successful, is because we know the local market better than anyone, because that's where we grew out of. But now we are at a scale, right, that we have to really pivot to a global first organization while those people on the ground are really understanding what those nuances are. So one thing that, yeah, I came in, like, even in the US, I forget how many media agencies we had, but it was way too many. We had one for digital, one for, local TV, one for radio, one for out of home, one for, TV, who's also doing planning. I'm just like, this is crazy. We're a tech company. Like, we don't need like tons of different, sources of data. We have the data. We need for one person to be doing this. So, we consolidate everything in North America with Mediacom, and they've been an awesome partner, and really starting to shift to really understanding, like, what are the channels that are right now versus what are the channels that are going to be right, kind of in 2 years. And then on the creative side is the same thing. It's, a lot of our ideas are starting from a media first standpoint, and we're backing into what our creative needs to be, and then also vice versa. But we're not only starting with these like big anthem spots like we have been in the past. It's like, cool, that might be our creative container, but underneath that, we're going to create thousands of pieces of content. We're going to be leaning into DCO. We're going to be leaning into things like director's mix. We're going to be leaning into, like, at least identifying what are our 10 local markets that we need to go heavy on, and kind of do like local TV instead of national TV with very relevant, TVCs for that market. And we're just pushing them. And I think it's been interesting to watch, and I'm not a creative person, but like even watching the production side of the house, like, sprint faster than they've ever sprinted too, which is like, it's almost an opposite for me, right? Because you think it's like, you can't really do production the way they used to could, you can't have all these people together. There's no more craft services. But they are just like cranking out spots in like 24 hours because they're having to. So it's about the right person, the right place, the right time. And we're just trying to at least align all of our creative, at least to the media plan, beyond, the Anthem TVC, which I think is what we really did in the past.
Well, you have a really awesome agency roster anyways. I loved White and Kennedy, and obviously Mediacom is great too. So the other question too is just around cost reduction, right? So, with rides down, you obviously, we still need to have a look at the P&L. What are the things you're doing to save costs, but also be able to be out there proactively with these new initiatives?
Yeah. So, I mean, the good thing is like, obviously as the rides business has declined, the eats business has been just growing exponentially. I think we had our earnings, was it last week or the week before? But obviously our eats business is not made up for the rides business. But moving forward, Dara basically said it will be a 50-50 split. When things get back to normal, this is our new normal. It's not the old way. It is just ensuring that, like, eats and rides are, as we've now shifted into, mobility and delivery as kind of our new kind of anchor products. It's really about that. And I think what's happened on the previously known as eats, now as delivery, is we're really starting to understand, like, and how to diversify that entire portfolio, ensuring that we're not only increasing the food delivery business, but ensuring that we're able to attach ourselves to other types of delivery that we've just found that consumers need. So, we had the corner shop acquisition from Latin America that we piloted now, I think, in Dallas and Miami and all of Canada, which is partnering with the supermarkets to do proper food delivery. We're going to be doing pharmaceutical delivery, in partnership with different drugstores. We have the Postmates acquisition as well, which, when you think about just like their technology that they've built as a means for delivery, and, because when they first started, they weren't just about food delivery, they were about delivery as a macro. So that's really our purpose moving forward, is like, how do you move what's important? Whether moving is a human being, whether moving is food delivery, whether moving is grocery, whether moving is pharma, whether moving is literally it's your birthday and I want to call, a bakery and have that bakery deliver that cake to you, right? You can do all of that through Uber, and it all becomes a singular source of truth. that you're able to do that. So I think it's like, are we going to make up for the lost revenue, on the ride side of the business in, the next couple of months? No. Are we going to put ourselves in such a stronger position coming out of this than we were when we went into it? Absolutely. Through the diversification that we're doing.
I love that. I mean, so what I'm hearing is that instead of just focusing on cost reduction, you're doubling down. You're like, what acquisitions can we make during this time? How do we grow the other services that we can bring, broaden our approach to delivering mobility to drive up revenue so that you guys are really going to be well positioned when we come out of this, right?
And I also think on the media side, like, I don't, efficiencies aren't the most important thing for me. Like, I'm willing to pay more for media all day long as long as I know that it's going to be more impactful. So like the simple equation, right, of effectiveness over efficiency, which are ROI. My ROI continues to increase, I'll pay triple, right? Like for the media, if I know that that effectiveness lever is going to be the one that is actually driving a higher ROI. So we're not in the world where we're like, well, we have to cut, like because we have a limited budget, we need to cut out some of our higher, like the CPMs that might be higher than the others. It's like maybe actually we need to cut out some of this really long tail stuff that was much more driven on kind of the importance of what's going on from the top all the way pushing down the bottom, because that's where our effectiveness. So it's like we have to think about like the effectiveness lever versus the efficiency lever too whenever we're looking at cost implications.
Well, and so that foots to another question nicely, which is, and you and I talked about this on our prep call, which is the balance of effectiveness and efficiency with emerging media, right? Where the reach may not be as big, but growing and important. And the question was specifically around, people working from home, their consumer media habits have changed, the CTV, and I know, so can you talk a little bit about how you're measuring effectiveness and efficiency for some of those emerging medias like CTV and
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, ideally, whenever we're going into some of these tests, especially, with CTV or any sort of like emerging media, we still do like to have measurement. So, the measurement doesn't have to be as robust as maybe kind of more, legacy media, but we still need to have some sort of direction. And really that's it. I mean, it's like, we talked about it in the beginning of having flexibility where we're first and foremost, we do audience planning. So if we're starting to see that our audiences are spending, a lot more time on, like CTV versus they are on linear, like, then that actually makes a lot more sense. And we're willing to pay a bit more of a premium there in order to reach that person at the right time with the right message, right? Like, and actually kind of drive that purpose. So yeah, I mean, I think, there's the whole myth of like, the 70, 20, 10, rule. We don't really prescribe to that. If 70% of our media was technically emerging media, I would be okay with that as long as I knew and I was able to understand that my audience was actually consuming more media on those channels than other channels. And I was at least able to get a directional read on what lifts look like. And for me, especially from a brand standpoint, it's really about brand lift. And if they can do it, how do we ensure that other third parties can? So can like a Millward Brown Kantar come in? Can a Nielsen come in? Can like someone who can do proper cross-channel brand lift studies come in and help us understand that? And then that's it. So we definitely want to pivot based on where our audience is consuming media.
Well, our focus, like from our perspective, it's all TV, right? Regardless of how that consumer is consuming it. And, the effectiveness really comes into play. I mean, we're trying to remove the silos, right? If you have silos and you just look in isolation at one platform versus another, your measurement's it's gonna be out of whack. It's not gonna be, but if you can look holistically at your TV investment and look at, linear TV and streaming TV and all the flavors of that, I think your outcomes or your measurement could be much more positive. Let's see, podcasting. So I know you talked about old media and radio. There's a question about, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with podcasts? I know we talked about, I enjoyed listening to my podcast while I was on my road trip recently. So a little bit about that.
obsessed with podcasts right now and streaming audio as a whole, right? Which is inclusive of podcasts for us. So we started to test it last year. And this is when you talk about, kind of like testing and learning. And, we always put enough in there to get enough reads. And we were starting to see, like, especially whenever we would do brand lift studies, whether it be through Servata or whomever we were doing it, that streaming audio was always an outlier in a really good way. So, we might be like lifting, 2 to 3 points across other channels, but streaming audio is like, 15, 16 points, versus, and we're like, what? That can't be right. So we would do it again. We would start to see similar stuff. So as of now, streaming audio is by far our top performing channel, without question, when it comes to actually increasing overarching brand metrics. So we're very bullish on podcast and kind of streaming audio as a whole. And I think it really makes sense too. Like for me, like I don't always have the opportunity to listen to podcasts when I'm in the office, but now if I'm working, I just have a podcast playing, right? I don't necessarily have to have my earphones on. Or now that people are just trying to get in their cars and just try to move and just not be at home, and they're taking road trips, like there is a lot more opportunity for people to be leaned into this to this type of media, and it's working super well for us. I love it.
Well, another example of old media that's measurable now as well, right? Which is good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, there's another question. You mentioned TikTok, and so anything about social and how social factors in to your strategy, any POV and all the stuff around TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, in general is, we are a very brand safe brand. And we take brand safety extremely important. So, I think regardless of the platform, what we always do is we always just try to push the platforms to ensure they are adhering to the brand safety rigors that we need, right? And a lot of that has to do with adjacency controls. And if brands aren't able to really abide by that and kind of control where our content is shown and kind of the adjacency factor there, then we are usually quite hesitant in order to enter that arena. It doesn't mean that we're hesitant to enter there, maybe in an organic standpoint, or like from an influencer standpoint, in order for other people to tell our story. But I think that whether it's TikTok, whether it's any kind of emerging digital platform, the first thing that we always look at it through is a lens of brand safety. If it can check all the marks on that, awesome, we will go all in. If it can't, we will continue to push them to ensure that our brand can kind of show up in a brand safe environment that isn't detrimental to our brand, especially our brand, because we have been on such a journey. And we are really, putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to, not only brand safety, but like physical safety and human safety, and how does that actually correlate across everything that we're doing.
Well, I love everything you're doing. Keep it up. I appreciate the partnership. I look forward to working more with you, especially this whole expansion of delivery and mobility. So thanks for the time. And I think David's joining us now. So I was able to get through all the questions. You had a lot of questions. So
that was phenomenal. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Davina, for kicking us off today. Really appreciate you having you both of you here. And I feel like it's a recurring conversation.